I'm Melanie, and you're listening to Tailspin. We've got 3 contributors today, 2 storytellers. They are Rachel Hillberg and Chris Holmes, and music by 8 Good Fingers. I held a storytelling event at my house over the summer, and I bring that up for a couple reasons. One is, during this story, you'll notice the romantic sounds of Long Beach in the background, like trucks and helicopters and such. Also, some of the guests were brought by Lisa Calamero. Lisa Calamero teaches storytelling at Cal State Dominguez Hills and also privately. She's been working with storytellers for over 25 years as a film and TV agent and producer. Her course is called Finding Your Voice, Telling Your Story. This was one of several students who Lisa brought to my recording event. Rachel Hillberg with the Eagle Eye Detective Agency.
So it's the first day of 7th grade, and the hallway smells like cheap textbook glue, sweat socks, and fear. And I realize almost immediately that it's my fear, because things are a little different this year. Suddenly girls are interested in hair and makeup and boys. And I'm just worried about what's going to happen to the Eagle Eye Detective Agency. So when I was in 1st grade, I read my first Choose Your Own Adventure story, and I was immediately hooked on a good mystery. By 2nd grade, I was reading Nancy Drew, and I decided I wanted to be Nancy Drew more than anything. And in 3rd grade, my best friend since kindergarten and I both started reading the Babysitter's Club books, the mysteries and super mysteries, and we decided we were going to form our own club. It was going to be a club of girl detectives, and we were going to call ourselves the Eagle Eye Detective Agency. So Amy was the kind of girl who, if you were into sports, which I was not, you would want her as your team captain. So naturally, she was our leader, she was our president. And I had most of the knowledge on how to be a kid detective that I had gathered from books, so of course I was the vice president. We had this friend Yvette who had the most gorgeous handwriting I've ever seen. And of course, we made her our secretary. And she was responsible for recording all of the minutes to our weekly meetings, or our bi-weekly meetings, really. We'd always meet at lunchtime at school in secret, and we'd meet and we'd sit on a cinder block wall of this planter, and under the trees we would talk about how we were going to get our first case, first big break. Because we're 8. No one's dropping cases in our laps. So how would we hone our skills with no real cases? We started making up our own cases, and this included just a collection of villains and supervillains that we had concocted as a mashup of the Power Rangers, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, and, because we were being raised in the church, the Bible. So our head supervillain, the baddest of the bad, she was Jezebel. We called her Jezzy. And the way it worked was anything that went awry, just in life in general, we knew Jezzy was behind it. So when Amy's neighbor's dog went missing, we knew somehow, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Jezzy was responsible for this. And where do you go to find a supervillain who looks like Elvira and dresses like Morticia Addams? Certainly the goth kids must know what's up. So we go to the mall, and if you can just imagine for a second. It's the 90s. So after school, if you can just imagine for a sec, we're tiptoeing and ducking behind ornamental shrubberies and crab walking along the wall outside of the Hot Topic. It was us. Needless to say, we didn't find her that day, but we gathered some pretty good leads. The way our detective club worked is we'd only really meet during the school year, because even though we were really good friends, we wouldn't see each other that much over the summer. So that was fine, because every school year we'd pick back up where we left off. Like no time had passed. Detective meetings, at lunch, at the planter. But the year between 6th and 7th grade I could feel that the time had passed. Because when I got back, other girls were growing boobs, and I had braces. And somehow, inexplicably, one of the things that was cool, in addition to the hair and the makeup, was sticker collecting. So these girls would have these giant 3-ring binders full of sheet stickers that they would collect and swap like baseball cards. And when I caught up to my best friend Amy, third period, she was in that group with the hair and the boobs and the stickers. And I found Yvette at lunch later, and she wasn't super into talking about detective shenanigans either, and it was kind of a moot point without our president. That was okay. We'll just take a little bit of a longer break and come back later, adjust to junior high. But as the year wore on, I started to worry that Amy was telling our top secret detective club stuff to her new friends. Maybe gossiping, but I didn't have any proof, and I couldn't imagine that she would betray me like that. So one day I'm walking into gym, which sucks because I'm a nerd and it's gym class. And I'm wearing this oversized heather gray t-shirt with our school logo on the front and these giant basketball shorts, navy blue, that go all the way down to my knees and my little stick legs stick out of them. Just feeling gross and self-conscious. And as I walk into the gym, I see Amy and her circle of future cheerleaders, and their gym outfits even seem to fit them better than mine fits me. And they're talking and laughing, and I get a knot in my stomach. And she looks up at me. It's really the first time she's acknowledged my presence this year. And I get really worried, but I get a little bit of hope because she's had time to get used to this group of people and feel integrated into this group. Maybe this is the moment where she asks if her best friend since kindergarten can be invited to join in their shenanigans. And sure enough, she says something to this other girl, Carly, and Carly comes over, and I kind of look behind me to make sure that I'm not about to embarrass myself as she's saying hi to somebody else who's walking in behind me, and there's no one else there. So she gets about 3 feet from me, and she smiles at me, and she says, "So, how's Jezzy?" Then I have my evidence. I'm crushed. And I feel alone. I've lost my detective club. I've lost my best friend. Needless to say, I cry myself to sleep that night and many other nights that year. And I start to spend a good deal of time in the junior high library where I discover this incredible encyclopedia of art. And it reminds me that when everyone else left the detective club, I was left with what I started out with, my imagination. And as soon as I let go of the embarrassment I felt it had caused me, I let it lead me. And it led me to meeting other creative weirdos, artists, mystery lovers, and it led me to an amazing art career, one that I couldn't imagine possible, where I never had to stop being a girl detective because that's what my art is about. I design little secret messages and decoder wheels, and I even got to recently work on a TV show making props and maps, code books, ciphers for this show called The Friendless Five, and it is a show about a squad of teen girl detectives. And because I'm a good detective, I also happen to know that Amy, while she was doing everything she had to be cool, still wanted to be an eagle-eyed detective. Because one day, when she was away from all of her cool friends after school, she saw me sitting on that cinder block planter, and she skipped over to me and smiled at me with a smile that was completely lacking in malice or sarcasm. And she handed me a sticker from her sticker collection. It was a smiley face wearing sunglasses, and in big, bold font, it said, "Great Detective."
ever experienced the comfort you'll get from a single pair of sensible shoes. Sensible shoes, slip on a pair, you're walking on air. Sensible shoes, drop the pretense, come home to your friends. If your whole life flashes before you at night, and you're confused about the things that you do, when you've tried it your way and it doesn't work, it's time to try a situation that's new. You can waste your life chasing fashion awards, spit and polish till your fingers are blue, but you can't move ahead till you deal with the pain. Walk a mile in my sensible shoes. Sensible shoes, slip on a pair, you're walking on air. Sensible shoes, drop the pretense, come home to your friends. Oh, sometimes people don't understand. Aspirations get out of hand. You'd be best with a cheaper brand, a deeper tan, a virgin sand, an unpretentious piece of land for two, me and you. Sensible shoes, slip on a pair, you're walking on air. Sensible shoes, drop the pretense, come home to your friends. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That was Eight Good Fingers with Sensible Shoes. I dig that song. It feels very Elvis Costello-y to me. It's from the recent album entitled, wait for it, Sensible Shoes. You can find that and more music by Eight Good Fingers on Bandcamp and iTunes. Before that was Rachel Hillberg with the Eagle-Eyed Detective Agency. Now, if you go online and her website, rachelhillberg.com and tinytelegrams.com, you can see her artwork. And now you've got some insight into who Rachel is. You'll enjoy her art even more. Next is Chris Holmes.
Today I'm going to tell you a story about the people who created Dungeons & Dragons and my dad, who had something to do with it back in the mid-'70s. And I'm going to tell it to you because it was an important part of my adolescence and an important thing in my life that made it better, I think. And it's touched a lot of other people's lives, and now it's not so embarrassing to talk about because there's so many nerds in the world. So my dad was one of the big ones. So back in, I think, 1975, we were shown how to play Dungeons & Dragons by some high school students from an alternative high school. And at their school, you could get math credit for playing Dungeons & Dragons, which was pretty humorous to me because mostly you roll dice, which is not very sophisticated math, which is a good thing because I'm terrible at math. So anyway, let me go back a little. The people who created this game were war gamers from the Midwest, and they made rules for medieval war games with little miniature armies that were about an inch tall, and they'd set them up in their basement on a huge table or a sandbox, and they'd fight battles with them. And then they decided to add a fantasy supplement because they were fans of the Lord of the Rings books, and so that you could have armies of elves, and you could have wizards casting spells, and you could throw dragons in there and whatnot. And then the people liked playing these fantasy war games so much that they kind of expanded them and added the element of characters. And then they created a game where you played different fantasy characters. You could play a wizard or an elf or a fighter or a hobbit. And this game, which was created by war game people, took off and was actually interested. People were interested in playing it who didn't know what war games were, who didn't really care about that. They just thought it was cool to play these characters. And they thought it was really cool that the games didn't end with anyone winning or losing, but with the characters going on to more adventures and becoming more powerful and getting more treasures and growing into more interesting relationships with one another. And so my brother met these people, and they told him about this game, and he said, oh, that's the kind of thing my dad would be into, because my dad was a science fiction writer as a hobby, but he did have a book published, and he was a great fan of Tolkien and other fantasy writers. So he and I and my brother played this game, and we were shown how to roll up our characters and how to make the rules intelligible. Because in those days, if you didn't know about war games and some of the things that went into the game, you couldn't play the game yourself just by buying the 3 little books and some dice. You had to be sort of indoctrinated into it by someone who knew. So these high school kids were like evangelical D&D players. They wanted to pass on the game to everyone. And my dad said somebody should write a beginner's guide to the game so that you could, just buy this guide and learn how to play at home, and you wouldn't have to know someone who knew someone. And I said, yeah, that's probably a good idea, but don't you think all the nerds are already playing it? Because it seems like everyone in America's already played the game. Who's ever going to know about it? Because I didn't think there were that many nerds out there at the time. And I was extremely wrong about this, because when my dad did write that beginner's guide, it sold over 1 million copies. But before that happened, of course, he wrote the company, TSR Hobbies, a letter and told them that he was a neurology professor and a science fiction writer, and he thought he could write a beginner's guide to the game, and would they be interested? And I believe Gary Gygax called him back, at least one of the people in the company, which wasn't very large at the time, called him back and said, yeah, that's a great idea. We were thinking of doing that ourselves, but we're very busy right now making advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And so if you could write it for us, that would be great. But we don't have any money. We couldn't pay you to write this book, but we can give you free games for the rest of your life if you're interested in that. And my dad said, sure, that sounds fine. And that was possibly a mistake, but anyway, he wrote the game, and it was eventually called the Basic Set, and it came with a set of plastic dice and a couple other items. And a lot of people who are now in their 40s, that was their first introduction to the game, and they are very sort of have a sentimental attachment to it, which is kind of neat. And my dad was made a guest of honor, among others, at one of their conventions in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. So we'd actually gone ourselves to Lake Geneva earlier, before this game came out, and wandered around and looked at the people playing war games and scratched our heads and played a couple of games there, but we weren't really sure. The people in the Midwest played a slightly different version than the people on the West Coast, and we were kind of intimidated by the differences, and we thought that, we didn't want to let on that we didn't understand all the rules yet. But by the time he was a guest of honor, and he got to lecture to a big lecture hall full of nerdy war gamers, and we got to go to a banquet where I sat next to Gary Gygax's daughter, and awards were given out, and it was a very exciting time for me as a teenager. And I'd also had a drawing I made for one of my dad's short stories printed in a magazine at the time. And so it looked like the beginning of something really exciting and big, because there was a lot of buzz about Dungeons and Dragons, and some people were afraid of it, and some people thought it was a phenomena that might lead you into Satanism or mental illness or so forth. So my dad wrote an article for Psychology Today, which basically said, no, this game's not going to drive your teenage kids crazy or make them into Satan worshipers. It's actually just going to broaden their vocabulary and maybe give them a few math skills and maybe some social skills. So he was sort of an advocate at the time. And then he wrote a novel that was having trouble getting it published, partially because the main character in it was a hobbit, and even though you could call a hobbit a halfling, as they did in the later versions of Dungeons and Dragons, you still might run afoul of the J.R. Tolkien estate. And also Gary Gygax, and the co-creator of Dungeons and Dragons, didn't really give much support to my dad's novel, because by that time he had introduced the game to a well-known science fiction writer, Andre Norton, and she was writing a rather boring novel called Quag Keep, printed for quite a while, and some other minor things that were happening with him involving the game didn't really come off quite as well as they did. And we sort of felt like maybe Dungeons and Dragons was going to be just sort of a fad that was being replaced by video games, because video games were coming into their own at the time. And so I sort of fell out of playing games with most people, and my dad as well got onto other projects. And then just about near the time before he died, someone contacted him, and he was a fan of his short stories that were printed in a magazine devoted to Dungeons and Dragons stuff called The Dragon. And this person wanted to do a collection of the short stories, which was something we always hoped that might happen. And so that was kind of nice for him. And it's yet to come out, but it's going to come out soon. And as part of that process, I went to a convention in Texas and met a bunch of people there who had been introduced to the game and who were now playing with their children, and other people who were involved with the company, and the sons of people who were involved with the company, and who had fond memories of those days. And so they kind of treat me like I'm something special, which is pretty neat, even though I didn't do a hell of a lot. But it's kind of a fun time. I keep running into people who've either played or want to play, or their kids are playing it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, really? I thought everyone would be playing Xbox games by now, or playing on their phones. But apparently the social aspects of the game are never going to really be replaced. And so that's my little part of that.
What would Cthulhu do? Go to Chris's website and ask him. While you're there, you can see some of Chris's artwork and get some more information about his dad's books and career. I want to thank Chris, Rachel Hillberg, and 8 Good Fingers for being on the show. And I want to ask you to contribute. We need your story, or poem, or music. Contact me, MelanieHiller.com, or the Facebook page, or Instagram. Without you, there's no story.
Look up! Look up! Look up! Keep your eyes focused on the beautiful. ever changing.